Anyway, stops me from moving around.
Huh?
Stops me from moving around.
Okay. Participants. Mute. Close.
Don't move me.
Okay. You're on.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So going back to some shailot regarding Hilchot Shabbat, we'll talk about it. It's very interesting. There's a question I was asked a few weeks ago by somebody in the community. The question is as follows. Somebody wants to arrange a family get-together. As we know, in the post-corona age, or the corona age, family get-togethers don't always take place in person, they take place on Zoom. So a family get-together between different members want to meet on Zoom on a Motzei Shabbat, on a Saturday night. There's only one problem. It's Saturday night here in Israel for those people, but the other members of the family arranging this get-together happen to be in America. And for them, it's not Saturday night, it's not Motzei Shabbat, but it's still Saturday afternoon, or what we would refer to as Shabbat. So the question was, A, can they participate in such a thing? And what should they do? So people have already raised their hands and said, what are you talking about? How can you participate? And the truth is there are similar questions we'll get to in a moment, which the poskim raise, and the answer is no, you can't, because we have a principle here of lifnei iver lo titen michshol, of placing a stumbling block in front of the blind, right? For that person who is where they are at Shabbat, and they are participating by a Chilul Shabbat. If we are going to participate as well, we are being party to their, we are causing them and being complicit in their Chilul Shabbat as well, and that would be a problem of lifnei iver. There are some questions that come out of this which are quite interesting as well. I just want to share. When I was looking up, there are some very, very similar shailot which get asked. We have one in Maariv Bazak. These are the Chuvot, which we've been studying together. This is Chelek Hey. So there are 9 volumes of the Sefer which have been published. The 10th is currently in preparation. This is Chelek Hey, volume 5, which was published about 20 years ago. And as I was going through, we'll get to our shaila in a moment, but there's a whole section here about questions of Hilchot Shabbat to do with the internet, to do with new technology. And I thought it was just interesting to read to you the introduction to this whole section, to all these questions, because there are many new questions coming up all the time. You know, now we're asking about using Zoom on Shabbat, etc., or with somebody else in a different time zone. That's already an old question. There are many new questions coming up all the time, and if you want to hear more about them, come to the shiur on Wednesday night. But this is the introduction. So here, there's a tshuva about mischar by internet v'shmirat Shabbat, dealing with e-commerce, about running websites. If I have a website, am I allowed to leave the website open on Shabbat? What about if I leave the website open when it's not Shabbat for me, but it's Shabbat for other people? The people are going to be coming in, are going to be purchasing. Is that a problem? We'll discuss more in detail. But I just want to show you the introduction. So it says the following. It says, התפתחותו המדהימה של העולם הווירטואלי, internet, the amazing development of the virtual world, the internet, in the past few years, בשנים האחרונות, מציבה אתגר הלכתי ורוחני בפני מרנן ורבנן, has placed a challenge, a halachic and spiritual challenge before the rabbis and the poskim. פוסקי ההלכה צריכים לתת דעתם לסכנות המרובות מצד אחד וליתרונות העצומים מצד שני. But פוסקי ההלכה need to address the dangers on the one hand and the opportunities on the other hand that these things bring with them. And it goes through, it says, בקונטרה הזה נעשה ניסיון לחבר ישן וחדש, לנסות למצוא את המקורות בדברי חז"ל ובדברי ראשונים ואחרונים למציאות החדשה. So we've tried to go through and connect the old with the new, trying to find the sources in Chazal and the Rishonim and the Achronim. Obviously, Chazal and the Rishonim didn't talk about the internet and such, but spoke about principles which are going to be relevant for this new למציאות חדשה דמיונית תרתי משמע, for this new virtual reality, quote unquote. And it goes through a number of different issues that arise when it comes to using the internet and having an internet site open on Shabbat. We'll discuss some of them in the coming days. But as I said, this is already an old shayla. Meaning there are new questions coming up all the time about these things, about running a website. One of the things which is now being discussed is this talks about e-commerce. What about, now they talk about cyber warfare on Shabbat. So wars these days, as you may know, are not fought just with tanks and missiles and airplanes, but they're also fought on the keyboard. and you have all sorts of things, viruses, and people can go and hack into different systems. Some people here know much more about it than I do, but you can go through, for example, there was a case a few years ago where they tried to get into the national water carrier, the computer systems, and change the proportion of different chemicals in the water. This can lead to loss of life. You could attack, there are people that attack hospitals. Hackers could get into the system, turn off certain systems, turn off electricity. It could lead to directly loss of life. So there the question, the halachic question is, can somebody be sitting behind their computer screen and working on protecting these systems on Shabbat? How can you do it? When is it pikuach nefesh? When is it not? So all sorts of questions. These are just some of the things and more things which we can't even imagine, but these are coming up day by day. But before we get into the new questions, let's just go back to the old questions. So, and the truth is, this question, which I mentioned at the beginning, comes up on the internet, came up long before the internet as well, came up with phones, right? We go back a few centuries, and we go back to the classical questions that the Rishonim and even Achronim are discussing. So when it was Shabbat, and you were where you were, and that's all there was. Now, once global communication becomes available, so before Zoom, so we have a telephone. So it's Shabbat here, but it's not Shabbat in America, or vice versa, right? And the question then becomes, right, it's Shabbat in one place, but it's not Shabbat in another. To what extent am I responsible? So the question a number of the poskim raise and discuss, can I talk on the phone? Can I call somebody when it's not, obviously if it's Shabbat where I am, I can't pick up the phone and use it. Whether using the phone is an Isur d'Oraita or d'Rabbanan, and different discussions in the poskim about that. Not getting into it, but it's clearly forbidden. It's clearly an Isur. So, but it's not, let's assume it's not Shabbat where I am, and it is Shabbat where the other person is, right? It could be that it's that Shabbat's gone out here already, or it hasn't come in here yet, whatever it is. Can I pick up the phone and can I call them? So all the poskim point out, obviously, if the other person you're talking about is Jewish, so that's what we started off with, that would be an Isur of Lifnei Iver, that would be forbidden. The Chakat Yaakov of Breich was posek in Switzerland. He has a tshuva about this, and he writes at the beginning, he says, everybody knows that if the other person's Jewish, you can't call them on Shabbat. I don't even need to explain that. The more interesting question that comes up is, what if the other person is not Jewish? Right? So again, the situation is where I am, it's not Shabbat. Shabbat has gone out, and this could be, the question is asked in the context of a manager of a company. He has workers who are in a different country. And can I call them when where they are it is Shabbat, where I am it is not Shabbat? Again, they are not Jewish. So on the one hand, you might say, well, the whole reason why, if it's a Jew on the other end, it's a problem of Lifnei Iver, because they're obligated to keep Shabbat. The non-Jew is not obligated to keep Shabbat. Where I am, it's not Shabbat. I'm not doing anything wrong. What's the problem? That's one. The other side is, of course, there's always going to be another side, right? Is that we know, even though a non-Jew is not obligated and a non-Jew is not keeping Shabbat, nonetheless, we have responsibilities and we have prohibitions which involve, for example, Amiral Anochri, right? On Shabbat, I can't instruct a non-Jew to perform malacha, certainly not to perform malacha on my behalf, unless certain conditions are met, certain exceptions, right? The laws of Amiral Anochri are very complicated, more than we can discuss in the next 5 minutes, certainly, but very, very complex set of halachot. You know, some people think that you can just, anything you want, you can ask a non-Jew to do on Shabbat. That is not true. Some people think that in any circumstance, there is never a scenario where you can indicate or ask a non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbat. It's also not true. There are certain cases, there are certain exceptions, again, but the default position, unless there is an exceptional need, an extenuating circumstance, it fits into one of the categories, we would say that asking a non-Jew to perform malacha on Shabbat is forbidden. More than that, what if it's now before Shabbat? Shabbat has not come in yet. It's Friday afternoon or Friday morning, and you ask the non-Jew, you say, will you do malacha X for me on Shabbat? Right? So you're saying it to them before Shabbat has come in. Even that's forbidden. So based on that, we might say that in the same way that you can't tell a non-Jew to do malacha for you before Shabbat has come in, to do it on Shabbat, now, if it's Shabbat where they are, not Shabbat where I am, maybe that would be a problem. Maybe there would be a problem to talk to them or to ask them to do the malacha. So I'll give you a spoiler here. In this case, the answer is there is a minority opinion which rejects it, But the vast majority of the poskim, the Hilchot Yaakov, the Maariv Bazak that we're studying from, say that this would be permitted. Again, what would be permitted? To call a non-Jew when it's Shabbat where they are, but not Shabbat where I am. And the reason why it's permitted is as follows. If we look at the Isur of Amira Lenoch, of asking the non-Jew to perform, saying to a non-Jew to perform Melacha on Shabbat, why is that forbidden? So there are three main reasons given in the poskim. Three main explanations, and we'll see that according to each of these three explanations, how it translates into our case or doesn't translate into our case. So reason number one, which is given, is that perhaps why is Amira Lenochri forbidden? It could be because of that we have a principle that on Shabbat, the way that we speak, our speech on Shabbat has to be related to matters regarding Shabbat. There are certain forms of speech which are appropriate only for weekdays or inappropriate for Shabbat. And one of those is to speak about doing a malacha, right? I can't talk about a malacha, even a malacha that I'm going to do after Shabbat. I'm not allowed to talk about that on Shabbat. In the same way, to instruct or ask a non-Jew to perform a malacha on Shabbat, that would be forbidden. So that's one reason which is brought in terms of that the prohibition of speech. Second explanation which is brought, also brought by Rashi, is that it is similar, it's not exactly for different reasons, we don't have time to go into now precisely why, but that it is similar to the concept of shlichut. We know that in halakha we have a concept of shlichut, whereby agency, where somebody can act on my behalf. Okay? It's not straightforward at all to say that you can have a non-Jew before it can be your shaliach. In many cases it can't, but there is a certain element of asking them to do the malacha. They're asking them to do it on my behalf. It's related, it's connected, it's similar to the principle of shlichut. That is explanation number two. And explanation number three, which we find in the Rambam, is that the Rambam says, Shalote Shabbat Kala Be'eneh, that the reason why you cannot instruct a non-Jew, even though he has she has no independent prohibition of doing the malacha on Shabbat, is because for you, from your perspective, you will come to regard Shabbat light. Right? If I can't do malacha, but I can ask somebody else, not Jewish, okay, but if I go ask somebody else to perform all the malachot for me, then a person's going to come to be disrespectful, to be negligent, to take it very, very lightly, and you might eventually come to do the malachot yourself as well when you think everything can be done. So those are the three main reasons which are given why you can't perform Amira Lenoch. Now, sorry? No, not that. Taking that and looking at our case, whereby, again, our question was making a phone call to the non-Jew when it is Shabbat where he is, but not Shabbat where I am. Would these reasons apply? So reason number one, we said is related to the form of speech which is permitted for me on Shabbat. Well, right now it's not Shabbat for me, right? It's Motzei Shabbat or it's Friday afternoon. It's not Shabbat. Therefore, I have no prohibition in terms of what I have to, in terms of the way that I can speak. Therefore, I would be able to speak on the phone to talk to him. Reason number two, we said it's considered somewhat akin to shlichut, that the non-Jew is performing the malacha on your behalf. Well, even if he's doing it on my behalf right now where I am, it's not Shabbat. So therefore, that also would not be a problem. And reason number three, we said, the Rambam said, because you might come to treat Shabbat lightly. Well, if you know that you can only do this when it is not Shabbat where you are, and the reason why it's permitted is because it's not Shabbat, so therefore that would be permitted. There might be some room to argue. There might be some room to say that according to the third reason, it might still be that you're taking the Shabbat lightly, but nonetheless, that is what that is what seems to be here the consensus of most of the poskim, to say that this case would be allowed. There is one caveat we have to mention, which is if we're dealing with the case of employment, you're dealing with somebody who works in your business, and it's a business which everybody knows belongs to you, or everybody knows that it's a business which is owned by Jewish people. So where the non-Jew is, and he's performing the melacha, or he's on the phone, or he's if he's doing things publicly, that's similar to a case we discussed a number of weeks ago, whereby having a non-Jew perform something before Hesia, but that's clear that it's on behalf of a Jew, or that it's clear that it's a Jewish property or Jewish business or something like that, that would be a problem because of Marid Ayin. So that would be a separate prohibition. But the bottom line, can one pick up the phone? Can one